Nothing serious. Luo Ji opened his bloodshot eyes wide. I'm madly in love with a fictional person from a novel of my own creation. I've been with her. I've traveled with her. I have even broken up with my real-life girlfriend over her. Is that nothing serious to you? The doctor smiled tolerantly. Don't you get it? I've given my most profound love to an illusion. Are you under the impression that the object of everyone else's love actually exists?
There is a really lovely YouTube video of a dad and his like 6 or 7 year old son watching Star Wars with him for the first time, and it is there's one of the moments I just remember is like it's the Death Star scene at the end, and like Biggs has been killed and Wedge has bailed out, and the kid looks up at Dad and says, "Is Luke the only one left?" And you're like,
that's amazing. Yeah. They're like, yes, sort of.
Yes. Well, yeah, exactly. What a wonderful moment.
That would be, I gotta go watch that. That'll be really fun.
Yeah.
If this ends up in the ramble, we need to put that link in the show notes tonight.
Well, let's just get into Dark Forest then.
Yeah, we did a little Star Wars rant. We did our we touched Star Wars. Our ramble is done.
It is upper Middlebrow.
Hello, listeners. This is Jesse in the future. Since you can't see what's happening over the Zoom, Chris Bagg has just noticed my Star Wars T-shirt.
We can all.
Who else you got on there? You got Yoda. You got Chewie. Okay. Oh, that is a great shot. The Luke one is awesome.
I mean, interesting sort of like 3-tone art. I don't know if this is. It certainly looks like it's from about 1983. I don't know if it is.
Sure does, yeah.
It may be like a
look at Han Solo's face. It looks nothing.
Yeah,
it looks nothing like Harrison Ford. Well, look at that jaw.
You remember they did a bunch of like the Hildebrandt Brothers did a bunch of Star Wars art, and they used models that were not Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, or Harrison Ford too. So like there's some early. Some point like look at the Hildebrandt art for Star Wars, and it's like this is weird.
This is weird
it's
stuff.
This is like everywhere, everything, everywhere, all at once. Star Wars. Like it's like the same characters, but they're different.
Right. It's like a sliding doors Star Wars.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Just like another universe Star Wars.
Yeah.
Which not a bad segue into what we're talking about tonight. The first half of Book 2 of the 3-Body Problem trilogy, or Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, right. Which is called The Dark Forest?
The Dark Forest, right. And halfway through, we still don't know why it's called that. I don't think.
And you've read these before. I'm beginning to suspect maybe we won't learn, maybe we will. I'm not sure. But as you wrote in the ramble, most of part 1 deals with Earth's reaction to the news that Trisolaris is on their way. The Sophons, as we talked about last time, monitoring everything as well as screwing with physics. So ostensibly science isn't supposed to be moving forward, but there sure is a lot of talk about science moving forward. And our main plot deals with sort of our main characters, whose name is Luo Ji, a young scientist who is friends with Yang Dong, a deceased character from the last book who was the daughter of Ye Winsea. Who we talked about a bunch of at the last time. We open with Ye Winsea and Luo Ji talking and contemplating the end of humanity, and suggests that Luo Ji becomes a xenosociologist, a very novel field.
Yep.
And they chat a little bit about what that might look like. There's a little bit of a time skip. We get Luo Ji as a young, successful scientist. We learn about some of his lovers, one of whom is sort of just killed in a car accident. just very quickly.
Yep.
Like, he sort of ducks very luckily. He isn't hurt at all. She is like thrown through the air,
which is later revealed to be an assassination attempt on Luo Ji.
Ah, that's right. I must have missed that. But
the UN secretary says that in sort of like the last chapter.
That's right. Okay. But one of the things that happens is one of his lovers encourages him to imagine a dream lover. She asks him to write a novel with a character in it, and he ends up falling in love with that character, even though that character ostensibly does not exist in the real world. And I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, we'll also, I'll just say, like, there are a few little subplots we'll address. Mm-hmm. And listener, last time we said the plot was a little hard to follow. I think this plot is even harder to follow
it's very hard.
Than the last book. And I think I'm able to do it having this been my third read through now. But it is tricky. There are a lot of names. There are a lot of threads. There are a lot of details that occur. And then 200 pages later, there's an explanation for that detail as we just, or that it turns out that one character is distantly connected via like marriage or something to the thing that happened 200 pages ago. And it's hard to track. No surprise that Tolstoy is a inspiration.
Totally.
It has that feel
exactly.
of a kind of spidery, sprawling epic. But Luo Ji is sort of like abducted and escorted by our old friend Da Shi Kwang, and taken on an airplane to the United Nations, and he learns that he has been appointed to be the fourth wall facer, which is an individual who the Earth has granted extreme resources and powers to secretly develop a strategy to defeat Trisolaris. And he can't tell anybody about it because the Sophons are monitoring everything, but they can't monitor our thoughts. So 4 people have been recruited to think in secret. Luo Ji refuses to be a wall facer and leaves the building, where he immediately is subject to a failed sniper assassination attempt. After that, he accepts protection, but appears to not really be engaging in his duty as a wall facer. And from what we can tell, he's just like, great, I've got all these resources. Yeah, what a mansion. And in fact, he hires Da Shi to find his dream lover, who doesn't exist in real life, but maybe there's a woman out there who resembles this fake woman. And Da Shi does. And she's an art student named Zhuang Yan. Luo Ji marries her and has a daughter. Then, but I'll just finish up the Luo Ji thing because it's a little bit complicated. Then, Da Shi is sick with leukemia from the last book where he got hit by the dirty bomb, basically. And so he's put into hibernation, so he's gone. Then Zhuang Yan, Luo Ji's wife, disappears. And it's revealed that perhaps this was her plan all along, that she was some kind of plant from the UN, because Luo Ji needed a motivation to actually try to fulfill his responsibility and save the world. And so after kind of mourning her loss, she's gone into hibernation and left a note saying, I will meet you at Doomsday. Like, basically come up with a plan and then go into hibernation and join me in 400 years. It's very much like the Forever War. So he starts actually taking his job as a wall facer seriously, and he has an intellectual and physical breakthrough. He falls through the ice, and it leaves him to conceive a new strategy, which he does not fully disclose. At one point, he only says it's a spell, but he transmits the coordinates of a nearby star with a planet just out into space. And he doesn't say why he's doing that. He says it's a proof of concept. And then shortly after that, he is poisoned, and doctors put him into hibernation to send him into the future, where they hope he will be cured, and we'll find out whether or not his strategy or his spell is actually a thing.
I just, as you were saying all that, I was like just thinking about suspended animation and hibernation and all of these things, and like, is there a device used more often in like in sort of literary sci-fi and regular sci-fi, and like it is such a plausible way to be like, okay, we got to cover a lot of ground real fast, let's just get
and
out
it's
of
a
here.
plausible form of time travel too, right?
Totally. I do love how they say that. I love the way they talk about it in this book, that I'm going to the future.
Yeah.
Like that. I think I'm struggling with the first half of this book. There are little moments that make me be like, oh my God, that's fucking brilliant. And like, that is one of them, sort of thinking about time as a medium that you can travel geographically, in very much the same way that in the first book, the discussion of the Sophons and the number of dimensions that they can, that they're unfolding into was similarly mind-blowing in a kind of like, oh, what a gorgeous moment of both like literal and figurative.
Right.
But we got a bunch of other subplots, like you said. We got these wall facers, and then there is also a group called the Wall Breakers that are part of the Earth Trisolaris organization. And the Wall Breakers are going to kind of attempt to defeat the Wall Facers. And we get to see an example of one of these. Tyler, one of our Wall Facers, is confronted by a Wall Breaker who basically reveals his whole scheme and gets Tyler to kill himself. We've got an astronomer and the commander of a military unit. They end up actually taking a picture of the Trisolaris fleet, which does throw a lot of humanity into a kind of like tailspin of despair, which kind of is connected to this other subplot. Zhang Bihei is a political officer who is confronting what he thinks is a real problem, which is defeatism. And that basically people are giving up in the military even before, 400 years before the final battle. We also get a bunch of people who are thinking of escaping Earth, but that ends up becoming actually something criminal. And Dasha's son is one of these people who is part of a plan, and he ends up getting sent to prison for selling basically escape plan investment opportunities. He's like a crypto bro for future deals.
Like a Ponzi scheme or a pyramid scheme. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, for future escape plans. Yeah,
totally.
and I mean, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot going on here. And I'll just say, well, I think your first question is going to get into this, so I'll save my comment. But
yeah, so my question to you is, like, we've talked about the chessboard thing a lot. Like, a lot of writers, especially, Neil Stephenson is where it comes up the most, but it's coming up in a bunch of other places where there is a long setup period. And the thing that I'm struggling with is that this feels like all chessboard. I really struggled to find an actual narrative through line that was compelling in the first half of the novel. And I'm wondering, what's your experience of that? Are you in the same boat? Do you see a narrative plot line? I have a lot of compassion for the author in this case because he is trying to do something incredibly ambitious, and I'm not going to be like, just dispense with it. But as I was reading it, I was like, I don't know what is keeping me here.
Yeah.
And I wondered what your experience of that was.
I think I agree. And I think in particular, that was enhanced for me. I'm a pretty quick reader, particularly when I'm reading an audiobook. And so I think that my experience of when I read this the first time was I just got through this part really quickly. And what I will say is the second half is the chessboard has been set up. Literally, we just finished setting it up with the very last pages we read. And action starts
got it
right away. And it's good. And so listener and Chris Bagg, what is keeping us reading is the promise of it getting better and the promise that it will be as good as the first book we read. And I do really think it fulfills that promise, but I don't blame you for not being sure about that, having not read it. And listener, I don't blame you if you're wavering right now. I totally agree. It's all chessboard. To your question I think there's two sub-questions. And one is, well, he's got a lot to set up. So doesn't he need to do it that way? I think we can table that for later. I have a question about that.
Yeah.
To your question about whether there is an arc, I think there is a clumsy attempt at an arc that doesn't quite work. And maybe it doesn't work because it fails in translation, or maybe it just doesn't work. But I think that the arc that's supposed to anchor the first half of the book is Luoji going from essentially a gadabout to a responsible adult, to somebody who's actually committed to taking responsibility, and doing that through falling in love with real people, including his wife and his daughter. I think that's the arc we're supposed to see, but it's so weird because, I mean, I really think the dream lover thing, it feels kind of sexist. You know, what is your idealized woman? And then let's go find her. And then she turns out to be every bit as great as you dreamed. Like, that is not how love works, people. And we should not think that that's how love works. So, and it's an interesting, I do feel like there's kind of an interesting metafiction thing that he's doing. There's an interesting conceit to the woman who Luoji is dating, who challenges him to imagine the dream lover. It's implied that she has a dream lover herself, and that she's sort of doing this as a bit of a test to see if she and Luoji are really right for each other. And essentially, the fact that they can both imagine a dream lover who's not the other one is that's the like conclusion of the test. The answer is, okay, have a nice life. You know, she gives him a little peck on the cheek, and that's that.
Is she there right now?
Yeah. Is she there right now? Exactly. And is he there right now? And she's like, what do you think? You know?
What do you think?
And
I love that.
And that's a really, it's almost like a weird short story, like a kind of like O. Henry short story or something like that I think Cixin Liu got really interested in. And then he takes this idea of the dream lover who you can imagine, who becomes more real to you than a real person, which is a really interesting idea and kind of an interesting commentary on modern love, and then tries to somehow fold that into the plot with Da Shi. And like, we don't really understand the mechanism, but I think what we're supposed to infer was that like Da Shi was actually sent by the UN secretary to find a woman, that somehow they were spying on Luoji, and they kind of figured out what his dream lover would be like, and then they kind of like sought to find such a person and recruited her to kind of pretend to fall in love with Luoji, although from what we understand she really does, but that somehow this is kind of a setup. And like and somehow the setup works, and he actually, you know, it's a sort of About a Boy plot, or, you know, like I forget the writer who wrote High Fidelity and About a Boy, which is like...
Nick Hornby.
Yeah, it's like a Nick Hornby plot where a kind of like grown-up asshole becomes a grown-up good guy, you know? And that Luoji is, you know, he's vapid, right? He has a series of lovers. He's not super committed to them. He doesn't really take his job seriously. I mean, he's not unlike a lot of people I've known in their 20s, and he has elements of probably the way that I was in my 20s too. You know, I can recognize a certain shared immaturity. So I do think that's the attempt at an arc, and I think it's kind of a clumsy attempt at an arc, even though it has elements of creativity or of innovation. There's another word that I'm seeking. There is something interesting going on with the dream lover thing, but I think it kind of flops ultimately.
Yeah, it feels a little under-realized. It also feels a little just kind of half-baked. Like, it doesn't... A lot of the time in a successful book, some part of your nervous system kind of cottons on to what's going on, even if you're not totally sure, even if you don't like intellectually pick it up. You know, the writer is good enough that they're able to... I mean, like, this is the Hemingway thing, right? A friend of mine wants to learn more about books, and so we're reading Hills Like White Elephants as the like example of denotation and connotation, and you know, which is just the, you know, that's where you go to for that. And in that short story, you feel this enormous emotional ballast just like thundering along somewhere under the words, and you know, he's trying to do so many things in this book. You know, he's got so many chess pieces to set up.
And so many themes, right?
Oh my God!
There's like there's the theme of defeatism versus triumphalism. There's this theme of techno-fetishism. There's
faith versus technology, like, or faith and technology. One of my questions, what I was thinking about bringing to you was like, hey, let's list the themes in this. And I was like, oh my God, we can't.
Human values versus survival, which I actually think is the big one. I think that is Liu's like mega theme. Like, and that's and there's a lot. I mean, there's another interesting, I think what I find the most interesting about the first half is kind of the wall facer dilemma, right? Like, what would it be like to be given this job? And one of the things that makes it extra weird is that the wall facers are forced to go through this political process where they talk about their plan to their committee, and it's there's kind of an inherent contradiction there, right? Because they're not supposed to reveal their plans, and so it's like they kind of have to come up with a fake plan that they talk to the committee about, that the UN committee will continue to fund, and then they're all like kind of rivals with one another, so the wall facers are all like poking at each other's ideas too. And then there's this really interesting idea of the Mona Lisa smile and the wall facer smile, and there's this thing that all the wall facers encounter. Luoji is like, I don't have any idea what I'm doing. I'm just a playboy, like drinking, $30,000 rum. And they're all like, but are you? Or is it part of the plan? And Luoji's sort of like trap that he falls into. He's like, okay, well, fuck that. Yes, it's part of the plan. And he's like, I'm just going to become a hedonist because that's where this is taking me. But then, of course, like all hedonism, it burns you out and you have to find something else. And so I actually feel like you could have done some of those themes probably without the Dream Lover. I don't know. I have a question later about some of the subplots too, about which we might keep and which we might. But I mean, we're both in agreement, right? Like there's not enough action. There's too much chessboard setting up, and there's just too much going on in the first half of this book. And again, like I really do think it gets better. And because I didn't stop midway through and think about it the first time I read this, the effect was not so pronounced as it was this time. Because I'm like, I know how good it's going to get, and I want to get there, but we're just like, Luoji just stared at the white mountain cap again and thought about the earth.
I know. And they fall in love so quickly and sort of out of the, it feels really canned. They're like the moment they fall in love in the Louvre, and they're like looking into each other's eyes and whatnot. Something you just said and something you have said about sci-fi trilogies like makes me wonder if that's the rope that he is afforded, because it's sort of like, okay, we're in with the first book. The first book is strong. The first book is compelling. And, it's a little bit like Empire Strikes Back, where you're like, okay, we'll deal with some kind of slack plot threads because we really got to we have to drive to the finish. And it's one of those things where you realize actually Empire is like a extremely good movie because it navigates that problem of being the second, the thing in the middle.
And it breathes and it's moody. And this book also breathes and is moody, but I think it probably breathes too much and is probably too moody. It breathes and is
moody like a 14-year-old boy rather than Empire Strikes Back.
Yes, exactly.
Feels
good. Here's my question about characters, which is, I think one solution to the problem we're talking about would be to just focus on Luoji and his plot. Okay, Cixin Liu doesn't want to do that, right? He wants, and part of the reason he doesn't want to do it is that he's inspired by Isaac Asimov and psychohistory. He wants to think through the dimensions of this Sophon Trisolaris crisis and all the ways it's going to impact human society. So he creates characters to stand in for those ideas and to grapple with those ideas. And so, we can count them. You've got the three other wall facers. One of them has a wife who's kind of an interesting character. You've got Rione and Fitzroy, the astronomer and the commander of... you've got... someone I find a pretty interesting character, Zhang Beihai, the political officer. You have his old friend. You have Zhang Beihai's father and his three neighbors who are sort of like, they really remind me of Cowboy Bebop, like the old people who are always like, we dug the trenches. we dug them good, like who seem to exist on every planet that the Cowboy Bebop goes to. And you have Da Shi. And like, I don't know that I would say, and Ding Yi comes back for a little bit,
right.
and I don't necessarily, I'm not going to say that any of these characters are bad characters. They are all kind of interesting to me, but there is a lot of them. And it took me really 3 readings to keep track of them all and to catch like, oh, Da Shi's son tries to sell this like bullshit investment to Zhang Beihai's dad, who's one of the 3 neighbors, which part of that is just the like American unfamiliarity with Chinese names. So I guess my question for you is like, if you were going to pare down, which of these characters would you keep and which of them might you lose?
Yeah. I mean, the retirees have got to go. Like, I understand that there are important plot elements that I think are gonna pay off at some point from there, and especially because they show up early in this book, so your reading brain like latches onto them,
like those guys,
because we haven't met a bunch of other characters, so we're like, oh, these must be important, and then about 150 pages later, when Da Shi goes to visit his son in jail, you're like, right. Yeah. Oh, and
by the way, I think one of them is Wang Miao's dad, who is like the protagonist from the last book, who's gone from this one.
Yeah. Who is also like reincarnated in Luo Ji in a very similar protagonist, like a very reluctant and then like, okay, I'll get into it kind of thing. The retirees got to go. I love Rionye and Fitzroy, if only for the moment that Fitzroy is like, you appear to be taking pictures of the staff on the roof of the NASA building.
That is one of the best moments in the wonderful. It's like right up there with like the rats chewing people's limbs off. It's just a great little moment of, perfect. You can't afford to point the telescope at our arch enemy, but you can afford to point it at your scantily clad coworkers on the roof.
It's like this moment of like, please stop using the copy paper to take to print pictures of your buttocks.
Exactly. But with bigger stakes. Yeah.
With much bigger stakes.
Yeah.
And like I think at that point Rionye does something where he's like, coming right up, sir. Yeah, he falls into line right away.
Right away. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So, and that is an important moment because we do need to see the Tresolaris fleet.
And that image of the brush and the fleet going through the dust, like that's one of the great moments of sort of like action and menace in this first half too.
I suspect that Zhang Beihai is going to be very important, and this idea of defeatism is going to be very important. I think the problem with all of these characters and with the pacing is the first half of the book is incredibly flat. Like we've talked about upbeats and downbeats and everything like that. There's almost none of that. We don't really get a sort of undulating narrative experience. And I think that's why the characters kind of wash into each other and we're not quite sure what the focus is. So let's get rid of the retirees. All of this stuff could be accomplished a little bit more elegantly. I totally agree with you that there's a problem with like understanding Chinese names, and we should be better about that. And but I do really think that there is a problem of focus. It's like everything is sort of being given an equal brush. And that's a problem. Like you can't do that. You're gonna end up with a very sort of loose narrative, and I think that's kind of my experience of it. So, I would get rid of the retirees. I would see if we could get to the action of Luo Ji's narrative arc sooner.
That makes sense. That works for me.
I want to read this passage about the nature of love just because I thought it was remarkable, and I also think it is saying something about the nature of reality, because I think that's important to this trilogy.
Yeah, I agree.
So Luo Ji is talking to a psychologist because he has fallen in love with an imaginary person. Right. he has broken up with his real girlfriend.
This is a really good scene. Yeah.
It's just so great. Yeah. So he is talking to the psychologist, says what's going on. And the psychologist says, "You may need a bit of adjustment, but it's nothing serious," the doctor said after listening to his lengthy narrative. "Nothing serious?" Luoji opened his bloodshot eyes wide. "I'm madly in love with a fictional person from a novel of my own creation. I've been with her. I've traveled with her. I have even broken up with my real-life girlfriend over her. Is that nothing serious to you?" The doctor smiled tolerantly. "Don't you get it? I've given my most profound love to an illusion." "Are you under the impression that the object of everyone else's love actually exists?" "Is that even a question?" "Sure. For the majority of people, what they love exists only in the imagination. The object of their love is not the man or woman of reality, but what he or she is like in their imagination. The person in reality is just a template used for the creation of this dream lover. Eventually, they find out the differences between their dream lover and the template. If they can get used to those differences, then they can be together. If not, they split up. It's as simple as that. You differ from the majority in one respect. You didn't need a template." That was just one of those moments in this novel where, like, he has the capacity to drop very interesting and newish ideas.
Yeah.
Which is really remarkable these days. And I found myself beginning to think, like, I think this is important in the sort of scope of this novel, just beyond Luoji's sort of evincing of his character, because we've had this thing of, like, what is reality with the game in the first book.
Yeah.
And then, you know, a big thing that happens in this book is, like, Doomsday is 450 years away.
Yeah.
Is it real?
And do we need to feel it emotionally as though it's real? Yeah, and there's, I think, another interesting moment there is that one of the astronomers, when they take the photo with Hubble 2 of the Trisolaran fleet, suddenly becomes very depressed. And he says something like, "I knew it was real, but I didn't want evidence," or something like that. Yeah. You know, that not seeing it allowed me to not have to live in the emotional reality of it. And then it's also interesting because, like, 400 years is a long time. You know, our country has not existed for 400 years. You know, you could just ignore it and, basically just say, well, you know, it's going to suck for that generation, but, we could just see what happens. And, I do think that's one of the powerful ideas of the first half, that it's not that it's poorly explored, it's well explored, but there's so much other crap that those moments get kind of buried, I think. And that's, well, I'd love to share a reading with you, and then I think we could call it there. However, here's what I want to do. I think this was actually Luoji or somebody talked about taking a test and reading the essay question first and then letting your subconscious work on it. So I'm going to give you a final question to come out of this reading. And, you know, it's a tough one, but what do you think you would do if you were a wall facer? So think about that. And then this is a reading from when Dasha is transporting Luoji to the United Nations. I'm gonna read. Yeah, I'll read parts. So they're in the plane, and Dasha says, "Luo, my man, can you bluff?" Shikwang asked. Luo had noticed a pattern in how he addressed him. When he was joking, he called him my boy, but when he was a little more serious, it was my man. "Do I need to bluff against someone?" "Of course you do. So how do I teach you how to bluff? Of course I'm not a master of it either. My work is more along the lines of breaking scams. Here, I'll tell you a few tricks for the interrogation room. You might find it useful later to figure out what's going on." And then he then goes and sort of talks about some common police interrogation tricks. He talks about sort of like black and white, which is like good cop, bad cop. He talks about the list, which is another one. And he gives you some advice. Then he kind of like winds that up. I'm start reading again. He spoke animatedly and seemed about to take off his seatbelt and stand up. Luoji was seized by dread and despair and felt as if he had fallen into an ice pit. Noticing his discomfort, Shi Kuang stopped. Well then, let's not talk about interrogation, even if it might be useful to you. You can't take it in all at once. Besides, I was going to tell you how to trick people, so just remember this. Real shrewdness means not letting any shrewdness show. It's not like in the movies. The truly astute don't sit in the shadows all day striking a pose. They don't show off that they're using their brains. They look all carefree and innocent. Some of them are tacky and mawkish. Others careless and unserious. What's critical is not to let others think you're a person of interest. Let them look down on you or dismiss you and they won't feel you're an obstacle. You're just a broom in the corner. The pinnacle of all of this is to make them not notice you at all. As if you don't exist until the moment right before they die at your hands.
Brief aside, are you listening to these audiobooks?
Yeah.
The editions I'm listening to, the voice actor changes from the first book to the second book, and I really miss the Dasha of the first
I was kind
book.
of like it's probably inspired by the Dasha, the first book.
Yes, you were. Yeah. I was very happy to be back with that Dasha rather than the very bland one that we have in the second.
I agree. I think the narrator was better in the first book too. It's interesting that the pronunciations are different. And I will say, and hopefully this isn't too much of a spoiler, this is a tiny little buried detail that you might barely notice, and it absolutely pays off in the second half.
Well, I mean, I think, because the question of lying and misdirection, like this trilogy to some degree explores the idea of a police state with perfect surveillance, what that would be like.
Yeah.
And it's not really a police state because like the police are coming, but they're not going to be here for a while.
Yeah.
But
there's no privacy.
There's no privacy, but the conflict is deferred, but we're going to have to take a long time to get ready for the conflict. So it is really important if the humans are able to keep details back from the Trisolarans, which is one of those sort of master strokes of science fiction setup where he's like, okay, let me imagine my characters. Let me imagine the aliens. Okay, the aliens communicate in this like completely guileless manner.
Right. That's another wonderful detail that is sort of buried.
It's great. Yeah. And we had that really interesting discussion in the first book. I can't remember if it's between Evans and the Princeps, but it's like a human and the Trisolaran leader about the nature of lying.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm suspecting, because we talked in the first book, like I brought up the whole idea of unthwarted plans, where I was just like, wow, like things seem to be going very well for the, in a way that doesn't usually happen in narratives. I think in this book, we're actually going to see thwarted plans. And we already saw it with Tyler's, mosquito fleet and the wall breaker crushing his spirit and getting him to kill himself. I suspect that maybe we don't see all three of the wall facers encounter that sort of thwarted plans. I would guess that we see at least one more. And given the nature of narrative arcs and whatnot, and what we've been focusing on, probably Luoji's approach is the one that is going to work the best. And he starts his employment as a wall facer. He's a total newbie at a high stakes poker game who is just winning left and right because he doesn't know enough to be afraid.
Right.
And of course, the other wall facers are these like very important, very smart, very accomplished people. And very quickly we see them like disclosing their plans. And like you said earlier, like, are those all fake plans? Like whose plans are the real plans? like the Mona Lisa smile that we get both in figurative and then in reality, like that's very clear. That's important. So I think, again, it's this nature of what is real, what is illusory. And Da She's speech there is really setting up that idea for the rest of it. Yeah. So, like, I don't think that I think that if I were chosen as a wall facer, I would fall into the problem of the three other ones who are sort of coming at it from a very rational point of view. I think that's another theme of this book, the divide between rational thought and intuitive emotional thought. We saw a lot of that in the first book with like the calmness and numbness kind of ideas. But I really think the only way to be a wall facer correctly is to do what Luo Ji is doing, which is essentially to just not do it.
Yeah.
and kind of hope that the arc of history bends in your direction.
Well, what do you make of the spell?
Yeah. I mean, like, at this point in the novel, like, he has to come up with something concrete.
Yeah.
Like, if he doesn't, we're stuck in the first half of the book and nothing is going to move forward. And what I like about how the spell is kind of evinced is that he doesn't really tell anybody.
Yeah.
And because he can't, like, I was very confused by the amount of times that wall facers were like saying their plans to other people.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's clearly being,
and I think that maybe it's a little bit of narrative clumsiness, or maybe the idea is that they all have a plan within a plan within a plan, right. which was the case for Tyler, right? Like Tyler had the plan that he was telling everybody, and then he had the secret plan that plan was setting up, which is what the wall breaker figured out. So, maybe that's supposed to be what's happening with the other two. I thought about being a wall facer last night, and I was like, I think I have two approaches. One would just be talk to as many people I can about what they think the plan should be and write them all down in a notebook and don't appear to favor one, and then sort of pretend to engage in 3 or 4 different ones equally without giving any clues as to what the actual plan is. Yeah. That's one idea. The other idea I had was to work the Sophon problem. And that maybe you could either interview a lot of physicists and say, is there any way we can make particle physics move forward without giant particle accelerators? Can we make mini accelerators so we could build thousands of them and put them all over the solar system? So literally we just fatigue the Sophons. They can't keep track of all of them. Or could we build a couple of generation ships and put a particle accelerator on each and send them out in different directions? And that could also be kind of an escape plan as a backup plan too, if they were generation ships. So those were the two ideas that I came up with. But
yeah, I like, like what you're talking about is basically like it's like a full court press of misdirection,
right?
Where you do misdirection everywhere,
right?
And because of that, you're flooding the zone, right. Basically.
Flooding the zone. And throw a bunch of pebbles up in the air, and one of them is a guided missile, and hopefully they don't know which one.
Yeah, and so it's just such a. The thing that's great about it is, again, the concept that, like, okay, the plot here is we're going to entrust the fate of humanity to the secret, undivulged plans of 4 separate people who are never going to communicate their plans to each other except when they, like, sort of fence their bad ideas at each other and have some conflict that is probably part of the misdirection as well.
Yeah.
It's just, it's another one of those like triumphs of imagination that we get from
the
him.
idea of the wall facers is great. Oh,
it's incredible. Yeah. But then, you're sort of, I think one of the things that maybe he is frustrated with as an author are like the conventions of narrative.
Yeah.
It's like, if there were a way to do this in a different way that also isn't a film and also isn't like an audiobook or it's not a play, like there's got to be another way to do narrative, just narrative. And which like how ambitious is that? You know, like regardless of how I'm feeling about the book, like you got to respect the send.
He's extraordinarily ambitious, and he's not just sci-fi ambitious. He is ambitious like Jennifer Egan and David Foster Wallace.
Totally.
Like he wants to experiment with form. He has ideas, or Ursula Le Guin or Margaret Atwood. Like, you know, like that it's not just exploration of ideas, it's also exploration of how to tell a story. And I super admire that. And I will say that I think of all, we're going to read 6 sections of this book, right? You know, of this series. So 3 books, 2 sections each. I think this is the flattest. I think this is the one that is the weakest of all of them. But shall we do some trivia?
Yeah, I think the final thing I'll say, you know, you and I have talked about hot spots and cold spots. Yeah. This book is, the whole first half of this book is tepid.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what we're identifying is, in this conversation, though, there are how many moments where one of us would bring up a moment and the other one would be like, oh, yeah, that was great. And part of it is just, there's just too much, because a lot of the moments are pretty good, but they're kind of buried in just like, here's 72 pages of like a date with a dream lover, you know, on the mountains, you know.
He's kind of flooding the zone also. Like, and you begin, you know, when you're talking about authors like this, it's like Brecht.
Yeah.
You know, like the whole thing when you're doing Brecht is you're supposed to communicate to the audience that you know that you are an actor.
Yeah.
It's incredibly hard, and it's incredibly hard to actually pull off. And I think that is something that he's doing. He is sort of like dramatizing the experience of the wall facers with
we're
us
like the
as
Sophons, right? We're having to track all of these subplots without knowing which one, and maybe and so the payoff then is if you're right that Luoji has the plan, but if that comes out of nowhere, you know, maybe that will be the payoff.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to keep going, of course. But yeah, let's get into trivia. I am hosting. Okay. So, the International Academy of Astronautics, I didn't even know that was like a term, and SETI have drawn up 9 principles in case we actually do make contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. They suggest that one particular governing body should be responsible for the decision, do we reach out to the extraterrestrial intelligence or not? Is that governing body A, the UN Security Council, B, the UN General Assembly, C, the G20, which does include the EU and the African Union, or D, the Ring World Puppeteers?
I'm going to say B, the General Assembly. That just a guess based on what I know about the SETI people and their values.
You got it. You're on a roll. That's 2 in a row for you, if not 3.
Sweet. Yeah, I don't think it would be the Security Council because they're kind of assholes.
Right, and also totally dysfunctional now. We're like 60% of the Security Council at the moment is like actively in like some sort of conflict with each other.
And the G20 sort of makes sense, but if the G20 makes sense, then the General Assembly makes even more sense.
Makes more sense, right? Because the G20 is like a little like they are doing more stuff than economy at this point, but you know, I was like, okay, General Assembly's the real one. Security Council's the obvious, like, next fake one. And then I was like, G20?
I was trying to think of, like, what else it could be. And, it's like, I mean, there's the G8, too. And then, you know, I could also imagine, like, the World Bank. But I'm like, no, that would be wrong.
Oh, wow, yeah. I was thinking about, like, the International Criminal Court.
Or maybe there's some, like, international organization that governs the rules of, like, space and orbit and stuff like that. They certainly do that. I don't know if that's part of the UN or if it's done through treaty or... Actually, my friend Matt King is an expert in space law. He works for the Air Force. Yeah, he's a JAG, Judge Advocate General, and that's like one of his specialties. He's sort of like Jason Bateman's character in Arrested Development, whose dream is to be a maritime lawyer, except for he's a space lawyer. But
that's great.
Anyway,
that's cool.
There's a scene in this book where Wallfacer Tyler meets with a character who is heavily implied to be Osama bin Laden. Never identified, but seems like that's who we're talking about. That character that claims that he named his organization after Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy. Turns out there is a persistent rumor that Osama bin Laden named Al-Qaeda after the Foundation trilogy because the word foundation does translate to Arabic as Qaeda, which it's often translated as the base or like, home base sort of, but also like a foundation, like the base of a structure, that kind of idea, the foundation of a structure. However, experts have concluded that this is likely false. And for which of these reasons is the real smoking gun evidence that probably Osama bin Laden did not name his organization after Isaac Asimov's trilogy? A, there is no record of the Foundation series being translated into Arabic, which is bin Laden's only fluent language. B, bin Laden publicly refused to touch any book written by a Jew, and Isaac Asimov is Jewish. C, according to one of his surviving wives, Osama bin Laden never read books, with the exception of out loud reading sessions of the Quran with his family and close friends. But he did enjoy watching cartoons, including DreamWorks Ants and Pixar's Cars. That's C.
You went for Ants, not A Bug's Life? Man, gosh.
Rough. Yeah, one of them's Woody Allen, the other is Jerry Seinfeld.
Ants is Woody Allen.
Well, I guess they're both Jews, so like,
superior.
His anti-Semitism doesn't figure into this because it's not a book. He was an active reader, but declared sci-fi to be depraved and decadent in the 1970s after reading Ringworld.
Amazing. That's it. That's the initial incident that put us where we are today.
Yeah.
God damn it, Niven.
Niven got us into trouble. It wasn't the division up of the Arab states after World War I. Do you need them again?
One of Asimov's like big time works not getting translated into Arabic just seems unlikely. And B had a real ring of truth to it, so I'm going to go with B.
It is A. There is no record.
Really?
I mean, it was never translated by a major Arabic publisher. You could never prove that nobody ever sat down and did an Arabic translation, or So it's not 100% conclusive. But nobody's able to find a record of an Arabic translation of the Foundation trilogy, which is kind of interesting.
Gosh, that's wild.
It's like it makes me wonder. Something I haven't thought about that often is how being in different parts of the world might limit you from the world's great
Totally.
works.
Yeah. I mean, like this is an example right here.
Yeah.
We didn't get this book until 6 years after it was published. And think of the number of amazing books in other languages that we will never experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is a huge sadness for me.
Yeah, and it was kind of a accident. Cixin Liu read The Time Machine as a kid. It was a sort of banned book, and his dad happened to have a copy, which put us on.
Yeah, I loved that image of him reading those books under his dad's bed. It's just like such a great formative writer, image.
Yeah. Well, everybody, up next is The Dark Forest Part 2, which I promise to you has more action and moves at a better pace than The Dark Forest Part 1.
Upper Middlebrow is a Small Point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are part of the plan. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by me, Chris Bagg. We are supported by Jenny Grieve and Justin Reich. Thank you so much, guys. And the rest of you, find us on Patreon, where there are a number of tiers at which you could show your support.
And a reminder, Bagg and I are both writers and editors and can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. Somebody asked me today if I do grant writing, and I do. So I can also help you with that. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening. Don't look up.
Yep.
Don't turn the telescope back on your roof. Delete those photos if you do.
Don't let your sexy girlfriends in on the photo on top of the roof.
It feels like a detail from Mad Men, right? Like the hot
great.
secretaries in their bathing gear.
like Cixin Liu was just like drunk one day writing, and then afterwards was like, that's a really good moment.
I love when he has little flights of fancies like that.
I do too. They're some of my favorite. Like one of the greatest moments of that class I took with Lawrence Weschler was he talked about the way water flows through pipes, and that water flows much better through pipes that are roughed up. And he was like, don't make your narrative smooth.